are apt to decline by 20 they would have been by natural trajectory.
And Neil, it doesn't look, according to this poll, that people have much faith in that it's going to get any better. Where do you see the trajectory?
Well, I think here people actually turn out to be better economists than economists, because the consensus view, if you go back to 2008-09, was that if you hit the economy with a big monetary stimulus, zero interest rates, quantitative easing, and then a big stimulus from the fiscal side with a 10% of GDP deficit, there would be a V-shaped recovery. And the US would bounce back like it did after most recessions post-1945. But people recognize that this isn't an ordinary recession. And the real problem is the drag on consumer spending of the great debt that households accumulated over the last 10 or 15 years. And I think that debt makes it easy to see that there won't be a great bounce at any point soon. It's a very slow process, paying down that debt, and it restrains Americans from going out to the shopping malls. And that, after all, was the main driver of growth in the glory years before the crash. It was consumption. There's
a bit of a national sort of funk, isn't there, to Neil's point?
Well, I think what's happening is that there is a sense of a bit of a Groundhog Day feeling, that every Friday, the first Friday of each month, we get these jobs numbers, and really nothing is fundamentally changing. And the most depressing thing is really what was in Ron Suskind's book, Paul Volcker, quoting Larry Summers, saying that politicians, when it comes to reform, just want to be caught trying. And you saw that in your interview with John Boehner, his laminated proof of how he's trying to create jobs. You see the president in front of crumbling bridges that have been crumbling ever since he's been in the White House, but suddenly we're getting closer to 2012, so he wants to be seen to be trying to create infrastructure jobs. But it's all a show, and the American people sense it, that there is no real effort or will to create jobs, because there are many ideas out there about how it could be done, but it's not happening.
Let me just show you, Matt, I want you to weigh in on this, show you some numbers about who the American people sort of blame and hold responsible for this. Basically, in October, the president had a 15-point advantage over congressional Republicans on the question of who the public trusts to handle jobs. And a month later, our new ABC Washington Post poll has them tied at 40%, which is a big drop for the president. In terms of pure politics, what does this mean?
Well, that's why the president's in trouble on this. It's even if there is a glimmer of hope and some statistical basis for job creation, the American public gets to make the decision about whether or not we're in recovery. And until the American public's income actually changes, which it has not changed in 10 years, has not kept pace and has not kept pace with expenses, they do not believe the country's on the right track. And as that number goes further month to month, the president's number is going to drop unless the economy really changes and the public really feels it. The problem is there's been no politician on the left or the right, or Republican or Democrat, that has laid out a vision that the country believes they can see what the economy will look like in 5 years or 10 years. The country does not believe there's been a politician that said, here's where we're going and here's how we're going to get there. Until they do that, the country's in this great funk and great dissatisfaction.
So one of those endpoints is obviously what the super committee is going to come up. You heard me ask Speaker Boehner about that. Weigh in, if you like, about how and do you believe they're going to come up with an agreement by the deadline just before Thanksgiving, George?
The problem is by next Sunday they have to have a plan if they're going to get it scored by the Congressional Budget Office before the 23rd. The president needs this committee to fail because he's already decided to run against what he calls the Republican Congress. While he was lecturing in constitutional law, he missed that part of the Article 1 that says there's a Senate also. And the Democrats control that, and as Boehner said, they're holding up a lot of legislation. If he's going to run against a do-nothing Congress, it has to do nothing. Therefore, they can go for a big deal, which is unlikely. They can say, we got 1.2 trillion, which is what we're required to get, which is 120 billion over 10 years, which is trivial. Or they can let the so-called sequester happen, counting on the fact that Congress is going to say, well, come to think about it, we don't want to do that.
Those are the automatic cuts.
The automatic cuts have to come from defense, but defense defined broadly to include the great blob of the Department of Homeland Security.
This seems like a potentially huge miscalculation by the president, because as your poll shows, the blame is beginning to shift towards him for the underperformance in the employment market. And I think this will be another negative from the point of view of US financial markets if they don't come up with a deal, and if there's even discussion of going down the sequester route. And I think the president gets hit hardest if the economy is still in the tank 12 months from now. Almost every social science model that exists predicts that he'll lose.
Not just this president. I mean, just look around at the world. Whoever is in power is getting hit. I mean, look at what's happening in Greece with Papandreou resigning. Look at what's happening in Spain, where the socialist candidate for prime minister is overwhelmingly going to lose to the conservative pro-austerity candidate for prime minister. It doesn't matter where you're coming from. If you're in charge, you're being blamed for what is happening.
How is that economic crisis, I mean, the mess we've seen in Europe over the past week, going to affect Americans here at home?
Pretty directly, actually, because the situation in Europe is now the double dip, and that's been confirmed by the new head of the European Central Bank, who's talking about another recession. And the US needs the Eurozone, and indeed the European Union generally, to be growing well, because if American consumers aren't out there shopping, exports are one of the few areas that the US can hope to get growth out of. And that is something that the administration has been hoping for. So a Euro recession is really bad news for the US.
And I also think it has a tremendous effect on the American psyche, because I think that where Americans are today is they feel like they're the victims of a lot of uncontrollable global forces in the world. And they don't feel anybody is out there sort of in front saying, here's how we're going to do this, I'm in charge. And even President Obama, in his sort of speak, I think reinforces the idea of, I can't really do anything about this, Republicans are at fault, or this is going on internationally, I can't do this, as opposed to saying, listen, I got a plan, this is what we're going to do, and this is how we're going to go forward. So as the country sees all of this going around the world, it's just another thing of, like who's in charge?